Blessed are you, O Lord, teach me your statutes.
Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. So Mary gave me, apologies for the delay in getting here, but Mary gave me a rundown of kind of what Megan and Eli kind of coming at it from different perspectives on how younger people can get involved in the church. And so, maybe what I can do is kind of add a little bit different dimension, from my own perspective, how I got here, and sort of what I'm currently doing and maybe what I want to do in the future. And largely it sounds like it ties in a lot with what, Mary wants to do. So, when you, just first thing I'll say is when you look around at the people who come here, or even to St. George or, Greek, they're not necessarily, especially the new catechumens, they're not necessarily a part of that specific culture. And so you can see with each generation, there's kind of a different vibe to the Orthodox Church, right? And so eventually it kind of, not to be too controversial or anything, but kind of becomes pan-Orthodox to some degree, the further you go off into the future. So, I think there are a lot of things that can be done just from church to church, getting together, doing these types of things and these types of retreats and whatnot. But back to the topic of the day, or for this session, which is, as young people, how can you get involved in the church? And so I'll just kind of give you some things that I'm, from a practical standpoint, what am I actually doing? Maybe some informal stuff that I'm doing, because the definition of leadership is pretty large, right? It's not like leadership is just hosting retreats or, being a priest or, spiritual father, right? I mean, there's so many different ways that leadership can be done, because you're called to do something. What is that something? You need to figure that out, right? That's your conversation with God. That's having the humility to know what you're called to do, not trying to do too much. But anyways, from a formal level, I'm on the parish council. I'm the secretary for the St. George Parish Council, so I'm literally just like taking minutes, and just being a regular, council member. So it sounds like important, like, ooh, secretary. It's like, no, literally you're just like paraphrasing what everyone's saying and submitting minutes. And, whenever the president wants me to do stuff, I got to do it. But it sounds a lot harder than it is, right? So literally it's just, if you feel called to, run for the parish council, literally, and usually people will ask you to run, in the churches that I've heard. So, and then I'm also more interesting, in my opinion, is it's a group like for young adults, but really it's kind of for anybody, is what we call the Inklings group at St. George. And the Inklings was Tolkien and C.S. Lewis back in the day. They would have this, kind of group where they would get together, both, I don't know if they were Orthodox Christians, but at least, pretty devout Christians, would get together and kind of talk about interesting ideas, culture, literature, art, poetry, things like this, any kind of writings that they had, share ideas. And obviously it was, not meant to be anything, any kind of debauchery, right? It was let's share things that ultimately are seeking truth, right? It's truth seeking, it's beauty seeking, which in some ways it is prayer, right? I mean, you're truth seeking when you pray. So, I like to think that the Inklings that we have at St. George is in the mold of that same group, where we're just discussing interesting ideas. I try to prompt people to kind of, if they have an idea, a thought, let me know in advance, and I'll put it on the agenda, and we'll discuss that. We'll give them time within the agenda for that hour. We meet once a month, every second Friday. So for those who are interested, November, what would that be? November 14th, 13th, something like that, I think, is the second Friday. Or no, I butchered that. Whatever, you guys can do the second Friday. What's that? 10th, okay. Yeah, that's right. So, so the Inklings is a fun way to kind of get younger people together, to just discuss. It tends to be younger people who show up. But like I said, it could be teens, it could be people who are 50, just people who want to discuss interesting ideas in the lens of kind of we'll always tie it back to the church. We'll always tie it back to our belief system in some way, because in many ways, that's what the conversation is kind of, those are the guide rails, right, for the conversation. And so inevitably you hit those guide rails and you have a discussion point, right? That's something that's a little bit more, less procedural, more kind of on the creative end. And it's just something fun. I mean, who doesn't like listening to a podcast where they talk about interesting ideas, right? It's like, why don't we just do it ourselves in a larger form? So that was kind of the impetus for that. So parish council, Inklings, those are kind of more formal things. But I would say informal. And for those who like play basketball, this is something to put out there. And I see some of the guys that play basketball that are in the back there, but the basketball court you see over there every Monday, showing up and playing. Well, I don't show up every Monday, but showing up and playing basketball. Literally, it's just whatever that activity is, having some kind of group connection with people. You may not think of that as leadership, but it's like you have to get off the couch. You have to socialize with people you don't know. It's mentally taxing. It could be physically taxing if you're playing basketball. I mean, that's effort, right? You're actually, that is to some degree leadership. You're doing something you may not otherwise want to do, especially if you're kind of in a lazy, mood. So having something like going to basketball once a week, is in my view kind of an informal way of demonstrating. Like I said, any kind of social group, it doesn't have to be basketball, it doesn't have to be activities, it could be a book club. I think Mary said that the way that her organization spawned was from a book club, and then just blew up from there. A few other things I would say is just introducing yourself to someone you don't know and saying hi. It's uncomfortable many of the times, especially if you're in, a church community that is very cultural. It's kind of hard to break into that sometimes. I know, because I'm not Arab and I go to St. George. So it's, just introducing yourself and saying hi demonstrates a level of confidence, demonstrates an ability or a desire to want to meet people, which those are characteristics, of leadership to some degree, right? And it's harder for people, especially when they're younger, to want, maybe not to want, but to build up the courage to go and do, right? Oftentimes it's easier to do when you're a little bit older, or we're talking about young adult leadership, right? Not old adult leadership. So yeah, even just some goofy stuff, right? It seems goofy, but keeping a steady job, having a family, going to church, it's like these are the basics. But if you can't do the basics, you ain't gonna be a leader, like that's just it. So, while maybe that's just the fundamentals, that's the foundation upon which you kind of build this leadership building, so to say, if that's the analogy. But I think those are important, right? Because you can't lose sight of that. And given the time at which I arrived today, I should also mention that, you can't overextend yourself, right? So if just doing the fundamentals is all you can do, fine, then do that. Do that for 5 years, consistently. And then maybe you'll feel like you have more bandwidth as you get older, right? Don't overcommit yourself. And this gets to kind of the general concept of leadership that I think maybe when you're older becomes more obvious, but when you're younger, full of exuberance and things like this, isn't so obvious. And that's something that Father Chris talks about at St. George, the priest there, being crucifixion. And part of that in my eyes is having the humility to listen to God, to know what your role is, right? So maybe, your role is just doing the fundamentals. Maybe your role is like, hey, I haven't even checked more than one of those boxes that you just listed off, right? Well, how about you check all the fundamentals, right? And maybe that's your calling. And then from there, building on top of that. Just don't overdo it. And as you can tell, like I said, but from the time that I arrived here, I'm still exploring the boundaries of what that means to not overdo it. But definitely keep that in mind. So, but I would just say maybe, in closing, you're sort of taking the first step just by being here, right? I mean, just by listening to this, being here at the retreat listening to what I'm saying, you're checking some of those boxes, right? You're meeting people you don't know. So I commend, each of you, especially those who maybe are newer to Orthodoxy, to kind of, for actually coming here, taking that leap, and participating. So I will kind of hang around. I'll be here for a little bit. So if you guys have any other questions, or you want to, if there's questions now, happy to take questions. You raise your hand, feel free. But was that a hand? Oh, is that okay?
C.S. Lewis or J.R. Tolkien?
How so? What's the question?
Pick which one's better.
Oh, you can't choose. That's like, it's like pizza or something else I love, right? It's like, come on. Both, right? But no, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to come up and ask. Do I see a hand going up right there? Sorry.
No,
I don't mean to call you out. My bad. I'm
right.
just seeing like this. I'm like, is that a hand? If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to give you my contact info, or just we can talk more after this session. I know you got something planned at 4 or something like that, but where possible, feel free to ask any questions you guys have. So appreciate you listening, and thanks for the time, Mary. Appreciate it.
Glory to you, our God.